Thank you so much, Abhinav. And I believe it's the second last panel of the evening. And I believe and I hope that you guys are not tired at all, because this session is going to be robust. Just to give a brief outlook of how I think that, this year's budget has been, I feel that the budget looks like a consolidation this year. This is not just a budget for an year. It has looked at a long-term perspective, keeping in mind the digital economy, digital health ecosystem, introduction of e-passports, introduction of Desh e-portal for upskilling India's youth, and etc. So firstly, I'd like to congratulate our finance minister on going on to a level of mentioning certain aspects that weren't even into our limelight. And I personally would like to throw upon a policy which I really liked, was the idea of one class, one channel, bridging the learning loss induced by pandemic and required sincere attention. I feel the budget started with the identification of the need for mental health services. We can clearly say that this budget has been more of a digital march forward with conviction and an implementation path. I open the forum to you all, first of all, to tell me as to how do you feel has the budget been for this year, the pros and cons. And there were certain speculations also with regards to how this budget is going to be or should be. So I would really like to know from each one of you, has it matched your expectation of how the budget should be? I can begin with Sekhar Garisa from monster.com.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Hi, Sugandh. Thanks for a nice summary that you started the session with. I think you captured everything quite well. First and foremost, what we look for in a budget usually is to look at directional pointers of how the government is thinking. So from that perspective, to see that the big headline coming out of this budget is an acknowledgement that digital is the way to go forward. I think that's a big news. And that's a theme that has come in through and through from a skilling perspective, employability perspective, from even recognizing something like an AVGC for the very first time and talking about policies that would impact them. The bunch of digital rupee, digital currency, the problems of that the SME sector has been going through due to the pandemic, the learning loss that you said that people would have gone through, people who don't have access to digital means, and therefore how do we get that the bridge on the digital divide going. So I think directionally it's a big budget from making a statement on the fact that digital is the direction for us to go forward as a country. It also talks about a longer term vision about the next 25 years and where the country should go to and what the government is planning to do. It also recognizes the fact that there needs to be enough economic stimulus from increase in capex, from the production linked incentives across segments, which will spur job growth and investments. So all in all, I think they touched upon the right things. There's a great deal of acknowledgement about the direction the economy is moving and the role that the government has to play in terms of facilitating that. So all in all, a great budget. Very happy to see the steps that Finance Minister has outlined.
Sugandh, you're on mute.
I'm saying it's really nice to see that, people from your level coming out and speaking your heart out and, basically telling about the pros and cons of how the budget should be. But I'd really like Shashi also to come into the picture and tell us as to, has it matched your expectation, or do you think there could have been added something more, or limelight could have been given to certain other segments as well?
I think it was a good budget overall. It wasn't populist. It focused on the right areas. Purely from a employment, jobs, and people perspective, three things stood out for me. One was the announcement of government enabling creation of 6 million jobs over the next 5 years. I think that was a big one. The amount of investment that's going into infrastructure. Infrastructure is always something that spurs huge employment. So it's not just about this year, but over the next 4 or 5 years, as this investment in the infrastructure sector pans out, we will see huge creation of jobs because of this investment. And the third thing is focus on skills. I think the last 2 years have sort of brought in a lot of gap in skills. Not that it didn't exist earlier, but it sort of made that more. I think some of the announcements around building skills, around the creation of this Desh Stack e-portal which will essentially be a skill enablement platform promoted by the government. I think these are some pretty good steps in the right direction. I think this year has also started well from freshers perspective. We've seen a lot of companies in the IT services sector, especially announcing jobs for freshers. And our own survey at Indeed, the hiring tracker says 86% of companies are hiring freshers. So in a way, the beginning of the year, we are seeing two impetuses, right? One from the government, which is focusing on jobs creation, and two from the private sector. After a few years of hiatus, a couple of years of hiatus, focus on hiring freshers, which I think will be music to the ears of people who've had their education disrupted over the last couple of years.
Indeed,
So that's my starting comments as far as the budget is concerned.
Vishy sir, do you have something different for us and for our viewers to get from your end?
Well, I kind of agree with whatever the co-panelists have said. I think I love the direction. I think you always need an ambition, and then you need to get your direction right, and then you need to accelerate. So I think it's important now that we see the government agile, showing the speed that is needed in terms of making those investments. And to me, what I liked in this budget is when it comes to jobs, there is something for everybody. There is something for the blue collar, especially the infrastructure projects. I think it's going to create a lot of employment in the captive, the casual labor that is needed to build roads, railways, etc. The PLI is a great platform where you can see blue collar emerging as a very strong sector, and then the AVGC, basically the animation, visualization. I think this is going to open up a huge amount of white collar jobs. And then some of the things for MSME in terms of the funding that is being allocated. It's also going to help them revive. And MSME forms a large part of our country. So I think I like it. And most importantly, I think it's about the focus. They're not being distracted with, okay, I want to give some benefits to the middle class in terms of direct taxation, etc. By the way, direct taxation in itself requires a transformational change. No point in making incremental changes at this point in time.
Right.
So I clearly like the focus of the finance minister, really looking at what's the need of the country today and really addressing that piece in a very effective way.
No, very true. We could clearly see the focus that she's relayed upon different sectors which actually needed attention. So that along with you giving me your, introductory remarks, I also want you to focus on, I feel that the budget has strategically allocated funds to different initiatives, including Digital Desh e-portal. It is said that, it's going to encourage skill development and promote an innovative culture. Along with your starting remarks, I want you to, exhibit your views on how do you think that the upskilling on teenage level can impart better outcomes on professional level, as the both segments are like poles apart. They're not given the required grooming, which is required at their level. So how do you think that, introduction of such portal is going to be a game changer for all the youth who's going to now apply for jobs in two different segments?
Right. Thanks, Sugandh, and thanks for getting me on this panel. Lovely to have me to meet Sekhar, Viswanath, and Sashi. Listen, I agree with what my panelists said, but to me, if I look at it from an education, and it's something very close to my heart, and I've done several sessions on this with BW as well, I don't think so the budget did what I expected it to do. It did touch about on things, and I do agree with Shashi, which he said, and also with the other co-panelists on the Deshstack e-portal, and I will talk about it as you asked me, Sugandh. But if you look at it, the way we were looking at the education sector and the kind of expenditure we were expecting, the budget allocation has gone up to 104,274. Last year it was 93,224. The expenditure was only 88,000 crores. Now, we talk about, as you rightly started your conversation, you talked about, the one class, one TV channel program. And I always say that, the lower strata of the society, they don't even have a telephone, they don't have mobile phones, they don't have connectivity. So these are some of the challenges the budget, in my view, as a fine print, subject to the fine print being looked at, will have to be seen and how it has to go. So the budget has talked overall. If I look at it as a budget, and I'm no economist, I'm a lawyer, I look at it as more as a consumer, not so much of a consumer or consumption based, but as Viswanath sir has said, it's more on the infra and the capex. So yes, this will indirectly, whatever I understand of the budget, will create job. And that's what we are talking about. It will definitely create job allocation. It will create job indirectly through various things like the PM Gati Shakti scheme, which has the 7 engines of growth, and we're looking at that being looked at. We're talking even of the entire concept of the PLI scheme, which Vishwanath sir just spoke about, the 14 sectors. Now, these are all things which will, of course, the finance minister has always spoken very highly of the PLI schemes, and they will create job employments. But on the education side, I still feel there's a lot to be done. The national education policy, the implementation of that on a fast track, the for-profit educations to be opened up. You're looking at tech companies, and I'm sure we will talk about it as we go in. There's education providing through edtechs being given at 18% GST. Now, those things, I don't know if the fine print changes anything, but nothing was spoken, at least from the budget I saw anything has been spoken about. In the last session you were doing, a lot was being talked about education and the edtech and the startups. So a lot of things still need to be done. To say, yes, it's one of those budgets. I've seen the finance minister, I've been seeing the budgets for the last 3 years this finance minister has been giving. And this is one of those budgets she was like it's a foreign investment policy. She was straight on to the point, no riffraff, absolutely to the point of what she wanted. And she was very confident of what she was speaking. So of course, it's a great budget, I think, from an infrastructure and capex perspective, but a lot could have been done on the education and employability. On your Desh stack, yes, if you look at the thing, it's a skilling and livelihood. It aims at empowering citizens to skill, reskill, and upskill. Now, it has to be seen how the relevant jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities come through. Let's not forget a lot of these things will also depend on how the availability of internet and the availability of some of these facilities at the tier 3 and the tier 4 cities is available. Now, that is going to be the key in one, being able to teach people how to use, as Shashi also mentioned, some of the new initiatives taken by the government. But talking about all these initiatives, country is looking at an employment of approximately 2 crores. And that was the promise of the government. What it gives, as Viswanath sir said, or Shashi said, was 660 lakhs, which is 6 million.
Right.
That is through one of these PLI schemes, and I'm sure PM Gati scheme will give more. But we still have a lot of problems that we've seen in Bihar recently, and the UP picking up in the railway and admissions and stuff like that. So a long way to go, and to see how it really happens. For me, well, the portal is a good way of upskilling and seeing how it can be done. And the PM also stated the skilling programs in partnership with industry will be reoriented to promote continuous skilling avenues, sustainability and employability, and the national skill qualification framework will be aligned with dynamic needs. So a lot of things have been said. It really sees on paper as including for capex, how they implement it and how they spend.
So, we clearly see that there have been certain eye-catchy policies that, have been, told today. But yes, it's more of a speculation as to what level will these policies be implemented. Sekhar, we do have a view from Sidhartha wherein he thinks that there could have been more onto an education sector, and he rightly mentioned the categories that he was expecting. Anything from your end wherein you feel that there could have been certain more in a certain category?
Siddhartha articulated it well. I guess there's a difference in maybe expectations going into the budget between Siddhartha and me. I think maybe we weren't as hopeful and optimistic as an understanding the fact that this budget is coming in right between a wave of the pandemic, and therefore government rightfully we expected them to look more at investments and incentives than concessions. So some of the things that Sidhartha mentioned are the right ones for the government. Should they be looking at some concessions around reduction in GST for learning and a bunch of those things? But I guess given where we find ourselves in terms of the economic cycle, maybe at least I didn't personally expect those things to happen. This government has always been very good at calling out a vision and setting the direction. I think the devil is always in the details. We have to see how some of these things play out. Last year or couple of years, we spoke about a number of initiatives around connecting blue collar workers to jobs, whether it's with QCI, through QCI, NSDC, a bunch of government organizations. And we saw that from an execution perspective, they have not been up to the scratch, and and not much has come in. So even while we applaud something like a Desh stack, we'll have to remain to see how does that pan out in terms of execution. Does it really solve for the problem? Right, and it's a brave, bold statement on job creation for sure. PLI, we're talking about. Sidhartha mentioned about access to digital technology, so inclusion of telecom in that, therefore 5G rollout, etc., would get incentivized from a PLI perspective. So some of those things have been spoken about. I think as it happens with every budget, it takes about 2 to 3 days for the fine print to come out, and then you realize maybe some of these are just that, which are good headlines. Some of these have actually allocations behind them which make them more real. So we'll have to wait and see. But all in all, I think, from whatever we could expect, given the constraints that the government found itself in, I think it's good. What I particularly liked is some of those things, once the government starts putting it, in the mainstream conversation, good things are bound to happen. So from that perspective, the AVGC, digitalization, accepting that something as a digital currency exists and we cannot ignore it, and therefore let's at least start talking about it, good or bad. I think some of these things are steps in the right direction. And I think, from that perspective, we do have to give credit to the government for saying the right things. Let's hold on for a couple of days to see, how much of it has actually meet in execution, called out behind the policy. That's what we would like to see. There's also, I think, from a staffing industry perspective, nothing's been said about 80JJAA. Looks like it's going to continue. That's another incentive for people to create employment, which is also a good thing, to see. So I think there's enough incentive there. There are some areas where you would ideally want government to stay away and let them grow. I think that's also good to sometimes see that some things have not been tinkered around. On the direct taxation, I guess, there's always a hope that something will happen. I really doubt if anything will.
While I feel, Sashi, you are from a segment who actually produce professionals, not produce, but actually give them a portal, a platform wherein they can look out for their prospective jobs. Do you think with the initiation of such a portal, the Desh portal, and upskilling them, do you think there'll be a change in the way now employers will approach this new age professionals or the new age youth, knowing that, they'll be trained on some other tangent? Because recent surveys said that, there'll be a dearth of blue collar workforce this year. What is your view on the same?
There are two things. First, let me just go back to the skilling and education part of the discussion. Completely agree with Sidhartha. How much ever money you spend on education and skilling is never enough. We need to absolutely make sure that we spend a lot. And two, like Sekhar said, the devil really lies in the details, right? It's great to make announcements, but how it's implemented in the ground is what is going to make a difference. But while talking of this, let's not discount the reach of what's already been done. The first one is around the television based classes, etc. My understanding is that close to about 210 million households in India have access to television, assuming a size of about 4 per household. We're talking about reach of television being about 800 million. So that class or lesson delivered on TV is going to reach a large section of our population. And also with regard to your question around the Desh portal, yes, it's important that this reaches every single person, but we must remember that there are 745 million Indians out of 1.3 billion who have access to internet. So we must not underestimate the reach of some of these technologies amongst a vast majority of the country. With regard to training, skilling, yes, this is there. I think this entire portal, I think the success will depend on how close they're able to bring it to what industry really requires. And two, I think it's also incumbent on industry to bring people up to speed. If we can't, skilling is too important to be left to one pillar, that is the government, or to private educators. This is something where we need a collective and collaborative approach of everybody, right from parents to people themselves, to industry, to government, to educators, all of it. So we'll have to see the impact of this, but I think it's important that our approach to skilling, our approach to learning, etc., is more not sort of dependent on one person or one institution, but it's overall.
Very rightly said. And, your way of explaining is to an extent that, I've got a number of questions as well from our viewers. One of it is that was similar to mine, that the budget has emphasized on creation of, as you said, 60 lakh new jobs under productivity linked incentive scheme. How do you think it will bolster the economy? Also, do you think that with the introduction of Desh portal, it'll be a ladder to make the PLI scheme successful? That's open to both Sashi as well as Vishy sir.
Yeah, I can go first, Shashi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, I think if you see the geopolitical situation, there is a lot of manufacturing, etc., moving from China to India, and this is where I think the PLI scheme has been extremely helpful to the sectors where especially semiconductor manufacturing, etc. So contract manufacturing has become a big success, and you see a lot of money flowing in there, and this obviously requires people. And I think on the other topic which you were talking about, skilling, if you look at our traditional education system, it's more theoretical. It doesn't help people get jobs. And even with some of these things like portals, etc., coming for skilling, I think people would go for skilling if somebody can guarantee them jobs. Right. So I think there needs to be a good marriage between some of these portals which help people skill and also connect them to how after they get skilled, how can they get placed? And that is very important. Otherwise, you will have, and then, we are also in a world where things are changing so rapidly. So what I'm getting skilled today may not be relevant maybe 6 months or 9 months down the line. So
yeah, it may not be a relevant skill also in times to come.
And Sugandh, one of the things that becomes very important in what Viswanath said is that the whole degree, the bachelor's degree of 3 years, 4 years, followed with the 2 years of master's degree. Now, those are things of the past, and most of the, even the upskilling and skilling training institutes are questioning the whole concept of the way degrees are looked at. So I know this is not going to be part of the budget, that's part of more of other aspects of it, but these are parts of the education policy that should be looked at from that perspective. And just when Viswanath just mentioned about China, one of the things you have to see is China is going through a complete heavy regulation on EdTech. Now, because of that heavy regulation in EdTech in China, this is a great opportunity for India to really create EdTech education for leaders, right? And Byju's is one example. And other EdTech companies are coming in. And I'm saying that this is where incentives, perks, tax incentives, GST incentives, and all those things should come in to make some of these education sectors the booming sector. Again, what I felt, there was not so much of impetus. And again, please don't take me as criticizing the government in any manner. I'm just saying that there should have been more, considering that we are competing in China in so many aspects. So one aspect we are definitely better is education. And that's where we could have done or should do better, is by creating incentives for entities like Byju's and others in the EdTech space, by giving incentives and perks to create leaders here. It's just to add to Viswanath's point on China, because there is so much more can be done here in the EdTech space, more from the education and employability. And once the education and employability changes, it's more easy for people to access markets and go and see what can be done by them. It changes the whole dynamics. I was reading, I think yesterday or somewhere, on a girl from a slum from Bombay, now is a Microsoft designer, and she's finally bought a flat for herself in Bombay, and she's moved from a slum and moved there, and purely on the basis of education and what she learned from the education. So I'm saying there are success stories, and that is only possible when education goes to every strata of human life. That's the only way people can move, women or men.
Also, I
Hence,
think
it's
for
very
some of these
evident.
things,
It is pretty evident that you felt that there could have been certain more, level of limelight given to the education sector, because you said that there could have been other sectors as well to lay
I was
emphasis
just
on.
adding to what Viswanath said about China, and I said that this is one of the areas we could have done it, plus upskilling. And sorry, Shekhar was saying something.
no, I think
No.
I was trying to say the same example that you took of this lady who joined Microsoft. I think sometimes we underestimate the power of some of these small changes as well. And I think Shashi reeled out some statistics about, while we may feel that it might not reach everyone, what they reach to is still a substantial population.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, that's the glass half full story. We should obviously fill the glass up at the earliest possible time. But some of these initiatives have far-reaching impact. The other thing that was good to see is extension of the credit guarantee scheme for MSMEs, right? As much as we want the big corporate to succeed and they will create employment, we also know that MSME is a significant generator of employment. So, and they've been really, really impacted by the pandemic. Therefore, any help that we get to this segment of businesses will automatically result in robust employment creation. That was also good to see. I think some of these businesses are really struggling, and hopefully we're seeing the last of the wave of pandemic, and they can get settled down to a normalcy. But that was good to see that a helping hand has been extended to them. It's always on education. I think Shashi was the one who made the point that there's never nearly enough that we could do. The more we do, we know that the multiplier effect of whatever investments we make in education has always been significant. So I think government will do whatever it is. I think they should definitely be doing a lot more. But this is a problem that will get solved by people, both in public and private, doing a number of things. And I think from that perspective, there is also a significant business interest and imperative for private sector also to step in and make sure that the quality of supply and the quantity of supply is maintained. And ultimately, that's going to be the biggest driver for any massive change to happen. Ultimately, everybody across the board should feel the need that without access to quality manpower, the businesses won't be able to move. And I think we're firmly at that point now. All of us understand, that finding good quality talent is really, really challenging in these days. So I think that itself will create a momentum apart from whatever government is doing. So I remain super optimistic that, together with what the government is doing, what the public sector, what the private sector will be forced to do for its own business growth, I think we'll accelerate this journey a lot better.
Shekhar, as you rightly said that, you find it, or the industry is finding it difficult to look out for the required talent. Do you think that the government scheme of introducing this Desh portal and upskilling the youth of our country, it's going to lighten the process for employers in times to come, wherein they will get a set of, upskilled employee and the kind of skills that you are actually looking in for? Because I see IT companies stating today, we don't have enough Python developers. We do not have enough, people with core competencies. Do you think it's going to make a difference? Vishy sir can also lay his thoughts on the same.
Sure. I think, getting the skilling game right is not easy. I'm sure government will create content, government will create a platform. I think Shashi was the one who made the point earlier, how closely linked is this to what the industry needs, and the way that the content is delivered seamlessly to the candidates. A lot of it determines, how successful the portal is. Content is not the issue, right? Today, you could go to YouTube and you could get content for almost everything and anything, right? So we'll have to see how well it gets executed. I'm happy that they have made an announcement. I'm sure they'll make a lot of investments. We'll have to see how well they execute it. But even if they ensure that they're executing it to maybe 20 or 30% of their plans, it will still create a significant scale difference. Anything that the government does, I think the one thing we need to remember is they will be able to do it at scale in a very quick manner. So that's what I'm looking forward to see. Maybe they will start making some dent there with large numbers. The second thing, which didn't get too much airtime, I think Sidhartha mentioned, or I don't know if it was Rishi, about the whole national skill qualification framework. We'll have to see what comes out of it and how closely aligned is it to what the industry needs. And if that gets going and that gets incorporated into the education at the right levels, so maybe we will have a way where people will do the right things and get employable very, very fast, versus going through the same kind of 12 plus 3 plus 4 or 5 or whatever is the number of years that people go through. And then we start talking about, now let's talk about making them employable. So I think, it's interesting to see if that kicks in and makes the whole process of the education process more tuned to employability right from beginning. That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, that changes the whole education system in some way, the whole bachelor's and master's, if you look at.
At Randstad, we do research, and one of the things is about the future of work. And let me take this to a little bit of a global view. And if you see, there is a war for talent everywhere. Some of the countries have aging population. Some of them have scarcity of people for niche skills, etc. So, and then where do they go to find people? And if you look at the demographics of India, I think we have 65% of our population in the sweet spot, youth, and just getting into the industry. So I think we have a great opportunity in terms of the supply. It's just that how do we curate them, get them ready, and put them into work. And then I think we also need to look at, is it going to be a full-time permanent employee? So, and that's where different workforce models are emerging. So there could be talent which is scarce, but then it can be used by multiple organizations. So that's where freelance, part-time, those kind of models need to be embraced. So for those niche skills, you don't need to own, but you can get them when you need. So I think it requires a lot more re-engineering and thought process so that, we can really get the best out of all this.
Also, I was recently talking to one of the consultants, Prabir Cham. So he also, laid emphasis on the fact that, now that government is supporting the drone companies and the drone startups to a level that it might even relinquish the use of, in the logistics department, of course, people who drive trucks, because they are the ones who take logistics from one place to another. Now that, there has been a lot of emphasis on drones and the drone technology, does any of you think here that it could be a platform for in the logistics segment wherein, there could be a loss of manpower, loss of jobs?
Well, I think
that's a little far-fetched. We still need our truck drivers, we need our trucks. But sort of coming back to the earlier question you had about the 60 lakh jobs, PLIs in manufacturing sector, and I'll tell you why I'm very excited about it. Manufacturing jobs are the key to getting to middle class, and these jobs will be the foundational sort of level for getting people into the middle class, therefore getting disposable income, therefore being productive from an economic standpoint where they purchase items of conspicuous consumption, etc. So that's why any scheme, anything that helps push up manufacturing jobs is always great. And 6 million new manufacturing jobs, if done well, can mean quite a lot for the economy. Secondly, around the education system, obviously Sidhartha has, considering his involvement with the education sector, has a much better view of it. But I have a slightly more philosophical approach to our 10 plus 2 plus 3 years of education. I think the purpose of this journey is not really about picking up skills, about knowing how to do Python coding. I think the purpose of this journey is to be able to prepare people to be able to assimilate knowledge and use that practically. that's what the college and the postgraduate education should do. You can never build an education system that will make you ready for the skill that is going to be used the day you step out of college, because that changes fast. What education should prepare you for is whatever the skill is that is required at that time, you are able to learn it easily and apply it easily. So, I mean, again, this is purely from my philosophical perspective. I defer to the expert views of Sidhartha on how what the shape of education should be.
No, Sashi, I was just speaking from the data I was seeing of upskilling and skilling programs and how they look at some of these things. But I completely get it, what you're trying to say. Just a point of view, Shashi, from how some of those things are fairly long. Times have changed. The businesses have changed. The new younger generations are very different. So. Very differently approached. And also, let's not forget, what COVID has taught us is very clearly that the way forward is digitization. So definitely digital education is one thing which the government has done. As you would have seen, digital education is going to be giving, it's something which is going to be imparting knowledge to all across the country, different languages, vernacular languages, everything coming across. Big question is how it will reach out, and we're not going there. We've already discussed it. We talked about Gift City. We talked about foreign universities coming in, not following the Indian regulations. So it's a step in the right direction, as we've been talking. It's something which was much needed by allowing foreign universities to come for science, mathematics, and others being talked about. Excellent. But what about universities which are not in Gift City? How do we make them where private investments can come in and better education can go to people which are not in Gift City? But those are things which needs to be done. All I was trying to say on bachelor's and master's was the fact that because the whole mechanics and dynamics have changed, if upskilling and skilling does not need bachelor's and master's, is there a way out to reduce that time frame and to make sure that their employability is faster than taking that time to get there? So that was my point. But of course, lots to be done there. If you look at the national education policy also, look at many aspects that they've talked about in that. This is one of the aspects that they talked even in the NEP, which is one of the, I think, one of the best regulatory framework brought in by the NDA government. Still a lot to be done there. For example, they expected 6% of the GDP as part of the budget allocation. It has been 2.67 last year. I don't know what's the calculation this year. It's not going to be more than maybe 2.8 or 2.9%. The expectation is the NEP is 6%. So there was a lot of stress on spending money from the GDP on the education. So as long as that's happening and the allocation in the budget goes to lower strata of the society for using internet, using TVs, using mobile phones for education, I think it's a win-win, as everybody is saying. I completely get it. It's an exciting time as long as they can make sure people do get various levels of education, because a lot of people do want to read, but they're not able to get access to.
While talking about upskilling the youth, does any one of you here also feel that there is a need to even educate the educators of our country? Because now that, we are going on to a level wherein kids will be very much, glued to their smart devices, because now that there is a platform to actually upskill them. And it's my personal opinion as well that there is also a dire need to actually educate the educators of a country. So now that we have a plan to actually upskill the youth, what in your view should be a plan, or should government emphasize on to educating the educators of a country as well?
Yeah, and I think our educators are more open to being educated. And all of us saw that over the last 2 years, right? I mean, all of us who had young kids who have been attending online classes, we've seen teachers who are middle-aged and above who not very comfortable with technology, not very comfortable with some of these newfound meeting, apps and programs. They struggled for a few weeks, but then at least talking from personal experience, some of them took to it really well. And I'm speaking from my daughter's point of view, I'm completely happy with how our teachers have adopted to it and how they've done the way they've carried on teaching over the last couple of years. So yeah, I think it's important, and I think they're very open to education as well.
My point of view, Sugandh, is very clear. I think your question is the answer. The way forward is very clear. Digital education is going to be the way forward. We're not going back. People have accepted in COVID that you can learn, work, do a lot of things through digital education. People have to start training teachers. Now, I agree with Shashi. We've been also very happy in the tier 1, tier 2 cities with the teachers being trained, but I think a lot of stress has to be still done. And I think, yes, if done, that is the only way the right education could go down. I completely agree with that. I think that question is very relevant, and yes, it has to be done.
No, while I feel that, you are up for the fact that, educators are really into a frame wherein they've actually adopted a digital way. But I feel there is a lack of framework. Yes, they need to be skilled on to how to use certain platforms, let's say Zoom or Vertex. But I feel in the way they're imparting knowledge also needs to change, because for kids who have made a mindset that they have to be glued to screens for hours, there has to be a different way of imparting that knowledge as well, so that they do not feel that they're being stuck to a place and glued now, because there is no other way to get themselves educated. So do you think that there should be a change in the framework? I mean, Vishy sir can also answer on this.
Well, definitely, yes. I think, you cannot do it. You cannot do it in a mass scale as you need in India without a good framework. So I think that's the foundation. It's definitely important. And this calls for something radical thinking. I think you also, just to add to the earlier question about people who are teaching this, I think you need to have train the trainer programs, because learning is something which is important irrespective of what stage you are in. Otherwise, if you are not learning, I think you are going to become redundant, right? So yeah, I think that's the way I look at it.
On this one, maybe I have a bit of a contra view. I think the question was really, really right, the right question to ask. And I think we're probably quite far away from a good answer to this. And maybe at times there's a class bias seeping in, because at least my kid goes to a good school and the teachers have adapted to the tools but I'm also painfully aware, coming from a family where the 2 generations before me were all teachers, that it's not the case in majority of the country. So I think unfortunately, as more and more things become digital, that gap is going to increase, right? During Industrial Revolution, when US, Western Europe, they were the early adopters, that suddenly created maybe a 20-25-year gap between them and the rest of the world. And now with the digital divide, right, people who have access to the right digital tools and people who don't, that divide is going to be even longer in terms of the gap. So we need to really watch out for that. I don't think enough is being done to train the teachers for this. It's not just about adoption of digital tools, like you rightly said. It's about what frameworks would work better. I think the only saving grace from a kid's perspective, I think, is that today's students learn a lot more outside of their traditional teacher-driven process than they ever used to do. So from that perspective, I think kids are getting access to multiple things to learn from. But that primary channel, which still consumes 6 to 8 hours of their day every day, I think the quality of that needs to really, really improve if we were to make a real big change in terms of quality of outcomes. I think that's a very, very challenging question that as a country we need to solve for. So I'm afraid maybe we don't talk enough about it. Thanks for raising that question.
Yeah. So just a quick clarification. When I gave that example of adoption of digital by teachers, I was just referring to educators' willingness to take up more education. No, I completely agree with Sekhar that we need to do a lot more there. It's just that I think it'll be easier with this set because they value education, they value learning, and are more open to being trained better.
We rightly see that education and employability go hand in hand. Both the segments need to be strong to a level. Actually, education more, because if you aren't educated, if you aren't up to a level, then you will not even come into the scrutiny of an employer, wherein you might actually have the right skill sets, but then you might lack the knowledge, you might lack the reskilling or the upskilling that the employers today are expecting. So lastly, I would like you all to give me give your audience the parting way of advice as to what exactly in your view should be the takeaways, and what all the other aspects that one needs to focus upon. We'll start with Sekhar.
Yeah, I think looking for the details over the next couple of days will give us more sense on what these policy decisions actually have behind them. But I think irrespective of what comes out of there, what we cannot debate is the fact that we are going through a very, very interesting and exciting phase as a country. There's so many opportunities now than we've ever seen, even for people like us who entered workforce maybe 20 years back. So I think everyone should retain the sense of optimism that with government, whatever government is doing, with whatever is happening outside of the sphere of government, there are enough opportunities for everyone. Focus on skill development, focus on preparing themselves for the opportunities. For the folks who prepare themselves well, I think there's never been a better time to be in this country. So I think that sense of optimism is something that we should not lose.
Fair enough. Vishwa, your words of parting advice to us?
Yeah, I would say every organization requires people, right? So I think it starts from a need, and then you start looking for people. Are there people who match my need? And that's where I think skilling comes in, right? So I think it requires a little bit of public-private partnership. So organizations need to be willing to come forward, work with skilling companies, because for organizations, skilling may not necessarily be their core area, because their core business, they need to focus on their core. So that's where you need to come to these skilling companies who can really help in terms of building that, closing that loop between education, coming out of college, and then making them industry ready. And then the government has to play its role in terms of putting together this framework, if need be, incentivize people who are committed to do this. So that way, I think it's a win-win situation, but it requires a lot of a concerted effort from all these groups.
We come on to Sashi.
So I think in parting, three things. One, I think this budget has got enough things to help us propel the economy forward. There's enough for job creation. There is enough in the document for a focus on skilling and education. It's important that these get implemented well. And like Sekhar said, we are in for interesting times, and I am very optimistic about the economy, about growth over the next couple of years. And I think this budget gives us space to to grow very well in the coming years.
Okay, Sidharth, your views on the same? I mean, yes, I know education has been very close to you. So
no, it's a positive budget. I won't take much time. It's good to see, happy to see digital education being talked about, gift city allowed with foreign universities. Still a lot to be done. Transfer of non-profit to profit, looking at ease of transfer of ownership from schools. It's very difficult to do that. A lot of investment in digital and content. You spoke about teacher training. Still a lot of things that hopefully FY 22-23 will see some concrete actions by the education minister on these aspects, where it becomes easy, accessible at the lower strata, and including for education to be done by students in India through digital education. So of course, excited to see how things really pan out.
Also, I feel that, this data is relevant, wherein it is said that 60 lakh or more jobs will be created. So I hope that, we go above the mentioned number. And thank you so much, everyone.
Only through Sugandh, through PLI. So it should be much more through the PM Shakti scheme and others. But that PLI is what she's expecting, 60 lakh worth of jobs. So let's see how things move out. But from an education, still a lot to be done, in my view.
Thank you, everyone, for your time, for shelling out your views. Thank you so much.